We'd like to resume Synod. Ask the delegates to please find your seats. Okay. Committee 9 will meet during the afternoon break. That's during the lunch break, right, David? During lunch break? Oh, the afternoon break? Okay. So during the afternoon break, Committee 9 will meet in your original room 125. Yeah, of course, it can't be the lunch break because that's a special dinner. Okay, we are going to move to material from Advisory Committee 4A. Committee 4A, once again, invite Carl as the reporter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The material we're dealing with initially is processed through the Council of Delegates, and we will begin with recommendation under C, number 1, that Synod adopt the terminology of diversity report for implementation. Noted there with this change, remove the last sentence of number 3B11, page 58, for a helpful discussion about being aware of the, in quotes, white savior complex. See the link listed there. And we think the statement right ahead of it stands on its own, and exploring that did not see that that particular statement was helpful.
Okay, thank you. Recommendation 1 is before you. Recommendation 1, Advisory Committee 4A. Laura Copley.
Yes, good morning. Laura Copley from Classis Red Mesa. I was a little confused about that recommendation. It's a bit ironic that in the guidelines for the implementation of that diverse language, it says to not use the word ethnic, and it comes under the heading ethnic diversity. And I found some of the other guidelines in there rather confusing, where sometimes it's like some persons prefer to be called American Indian, some prefer to be called Native American, and it just seemed like the waters were rather muddy. Thank you.
Any other speakers? All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, the same sign. It's carried.
Number 2, that Synod take note of the adopted mandate and composition of the U.S. Committee for Guidance and Support of the Office of Social Justice and Hunger Action.
Recommendation 2 is before us. Any speakers? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, the same sign.
Number
Carried.
3, this begins our work with the committee addressing the abuse of power, and we as a group are introducing a slightly amended motion that calls for the acceptance of the report and then the COD's endorsement. So number 3, as you see it up there, is what our motion is before us, that Synod accept the report of addressing the Abuse of Power Committee and take note of the COD's endorsement of the report and consider and respond to the following recommendations contained within the report.
Okay. Recommendation 3 is before us with the wording slightly modified from the original printing, but the wording as it appears on the screen. Speakers to the motion? Yeah.
So we're just doing point 3 and then we're doing the ABCD, whatever else underneath it later on? That's our understanding, yes.
We taking the sub-points one at a time.
Correct. We did not want to enter into the dialogue that we had last night.
Okay? No speakers. All in favor, please say aye. Opposed, the same. That's carried.
A, that Synod grant privilege of the floor to Ms. Kathy Vandegrift and Ms. Patricia Van Reenen, co-chairs, during this discussion.
So ruled.
Yeah. B, and here begins a number of sections, each of which comes with a particular motion. This one regarding the training of pastors. That Synod mandate the Council of Delegates to form a committee to develop a training program on abuse of power. The committee shall include members from the offices of candidacy, pastor-church relations, safe church ministry, Calvin Theological Seminary, and Calvin College because of available expertise. The training program shall be a requirement for all persons entering vocational ministry in the CRC. Focus on dynamics of power within the variety of pastoral relationships, boundaries, tools for positive use of power and influence, and tools for preventing harmful use of power and influence. Be widely available and presented as enabling effective ministry, not as an impediment to entering ministry, and to take into account the cultural diversity within CRC churches.
Recommendation 3B, training of pastors. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, the same. That's carried.
Letter C, Code of Conduct. That Synod mandate the committee appointed by action in Recommendation 1 to draft a code of conduct for all employed ministry staff within the CRC. The draft code of conduct will be presented to Synod 2020 for approval. The code of conduct shall be signed by all ministry personnel who are employed by the CRC&A, local churches, and classes. Reviewed annually as part of annual evaluations, included in the supplement to the church order with links to relevant church order articles.
You have before you recommendation C, Code of Conduct. That was clever to put Code of Conduct under C. Well done.
Thank you.
Okay, Timothy Kuperis.
I was trying to get in on the last one. I really am not speaking exactly to this particular motion, but as a whole, trying to understand why it was either the Council of Delegates or the executive director that seems to do the heavy lifting of a lot of what we see in here versus like asking the Safe Church team to be the primary kind of lifter of all of this.
I can speak to that just with my amount of inexperience, but I know as a reporter we are told that when things get tasked, there are basically three places that those get tasked. COD, executive director, and then one other. So this is a pretty normal process. These folks have large shoulders, they work together well, and this is the way Synod works.
Joel Vanderwerken.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm in support of the spirit of this motion. Can we scroll it back up a little bit, please? I'm certainly in support of the spirit of this motion. I think a code of conduct would be a helpful thing for us as church leaders to have and to put in place. But I'm really hesitant about the scope of what's in front of us. And whether we actually have the ability, as it's written, to be able to have follow-through in a helpful way. First of all, there's just a slight, it should say recommendation B, I think. Is that correct? The committee?
Editorial.
That's purely editorial. But if you look at the rest of it, after we got this code of conduct here, we have a mandate, as it's written anyhow. Maybe this is not the intention of the committee, but it sounds like the code of conduct that is drafted and presented to Synod next year will be signed by all church leaders on the denominational, on the classical, and on the local level. And as wonderful as that would be in theory, I don't see that being a practical reality. And then what we've essentially done is adopted something that we aren't able to enforce as a church, and we're kind of bearing false witness about how far we're able to go in terms of our ability to address this. So I guess I put a motion out there that would maybe give a little bit of specificity to this. I don't know if it's probably, maybe it takes the teeth out of what's intended, but maybe before I present the motion, can you address that question? Is this intended to speak to all of those levels, or?
Could you read the motion, Joel?
I'm going to suggest that instead of shall be signed by, shall be, and I forget what the words were, but shall be recommended to churches, classes, and agencies for potential use in the following ways. So the uses wouldn't change. It would just be that instead of shall be signed by and whatever else, it's recommended for consideration.
I do know that the committee, in talking with Ms. Van de Grift, wanted to make very clear that their intention for processing this, while it enabled the CRCNA to do due diligence, it took no authority or decision power making away from the local congregation. So that certainly, in that sense, would be perceived as friendly, I believe. But I would like our representative from the committee to also maybe speak to that.
Welcome, Patricia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think what you're speaking to is some of the tensions actually that we experienced at the committee level too. And so that which is important here to realize, I think, is that we are giving this to a committee to further develop it and implement it. And they will be coming back to Synod 2020 with their recommendations. So we're handing it over, in effect, to another committee to work out some of those specifications about this recommendation.
I guess my concern, Mr. Chairman, is that the recommendation as it's currently worded is stronger than it sounds like it's intended to be by the committee, and I would not want to bind the hands of the committee, the COD, or the congregations by language that I don't think we intend, or could be misconstrued to mean more than what it sounds like it actually means. So can I move the motion?
Okay, so yeah, that's appropriate. You've had this little conversation to see if that would be adopted by the committee voluntarily. They've some hesitation and reservation about that. They're not saying that it nullifies it, but they're having some hesitation. So the appropriate procedure is that you can move it. If it's supported, then we vote on the amendment only. Okay, so the motion has been made and supported to amend this motion. Yeah.
If we adopt this amendment, the recommendation goes from being these shall be signed by and this and that to these shall be recommended to the church to do these.
Okay, so let me explain, and I'll try to do that slowly and as clearly as I can. If the motion that is before us to amend is adopted, then we suddenly have a new motion, an amended motion before us. And at that point, we will vote either for or against that motion. If the motion is defeated in that format, given this background, we will give the opportunity to hear the motion in its original form. Does that clarify, or do you have a different question? No, that was his question. Okay, so that was your question. We've clarified that. If you approve the amendment, we have that conversation, and then that motion is defeated, I will allow us to go back to the original motion and consider it in that format. That's so that we can have the process of discussion. Now the question is being asked, can you read the motion in its entirety so that everybody is exactly clear of how that amended motion, should it be adopted, should the amendment be adopted, would read?
So the amendment would make the motion read that Synod mandate the committee appointed by the action or recommendation B to draft a code of conduct for all employed ministry staff within the CRC. The draft code of conduct will be presented to Synod 2020 for approval. The code of conduct, now I lost my motion up there, shall be recommended to the churches for potential use in the following ways: signed by all ministry personnel who are employed by the CRCNA, local churches and classes, reviewed annually as a part of annual evaluations, and included in the supplement to the church order with links to relevant church order articles.
Right, so the wording would say then, shall be recommended to.
So the idea be, can I follow up with that?
Yep.
So the idea would be that these are ways that this could be used, that the committee then would have the authority to make recommendations on, as opposed to, this is what we're telling the committee it must do with its final product.
Okay. We will vote on the amendment only. Pardon? Yeah, you may speak to the amendment. Okay. So the previous speaker queue is replaced now by a new speaker queue. Michael, you'd like to speak? Michael, and then Daniel, and then Sherry.
Mike Vanderlaan, Classis BC Southeast. I'll also add that I'm on Safe Church Advisory Committee. This amendment switches the code of conduct from being optional from being mandatory to being optional. The whole purpose of a code of conduct is that it is mandatory for everyone to whom it applies to as we pass it. This recommendation guts it. I'm actually surprised that the advisory committee is not speaking more strongly against this than what they are. This recommendation to recommend it to the churches totally guts the purpose of having a code of conduct. The purpose of having the code of conduct is to have a clear and concise statement of what is appropriate and what is not appropriate for anyone who is, as we have here, ministry personnel employed by the CRC, employed by the local churches, employed by the classes. This changes it completely.
Can I speak to that? Yes, if this in any way is a loophole around that, then it is not a friendly amendment. Okay?
Right.
Words like potential in there really, take away the essence of the motion.
Sherry?
Sherry Tanclay, Classis Red Mesa. A question. So first of all, we have employees of the CRCNA at the denominational office, right? And then we have the rest of us who are volunteers. My husband and I both my husband worked for a large national laboratory. I worked for a university. For 10 years, we have been required to take harassment awareness training, not only to keep ourselves out of trouble, but to keep the organization out of trouble. So are you telling me that the CRCNA HR department does not require any kind of training for its employees in this area? Or am I misunderstanding?
I'd like to allow the ED to speak to that.
Thank you for the question. I will answer the question and then go beyond the question. No, there is training for all people. This specific is related, though, to a code of conduct. There's also a code of conduct for employees, contractors, and volunteers. So, in a sense, this, while it would be interesting and important perhaps to have synods action be directed toward, let's call it the staff, it already is in place. And furthermore, and I'm not trying to speak against or for the amendment, but when the amendment says that it would be recommended to agencies, that's really not how we work. It's not that each agency has their own HR department. Rather, we have one HR department. So,
Thank you.
Willem Delman. Following that, Nathan.
William Delman, Classis BC Northwest. When I arrived in my new charge, I immediately went to our local detachment of the RCMP and got a criminal record check done. We have a responsibility to protect the vulnerable. This motion would, as the brother said, gut the purpose and value of this initiative. I look forward to a code of conduct. I speak against this. I see it as a code of conduct, as something that will in fact enable effective ministry. And I thank the committee for their work.
Nathan and then Meg.
I've got to wrestle with this, and I'm sure we all are in some regard. As it's my understanding, the only binding thing we sign at the moment as pastors, employees, across the denominational level, at all of these levels, is the help me, covenant for office bearers, right? I am completely in favor of us pursuing a code of conduct on the local level. Denomination-wide, it makes me a little nervous because it opens us up to additional mandates. It sets precedents for Synod doing things like requiring continuing education, which ultimately I'm in favor of and I participate in as an individual. It does more than its intended purpose as far as creating precedent for policy in the future. I don't know how to navigate that apart from it. And so I understand the idea that this can gut the motion. I think the motion, though, still stands in that we're recommending to Synod 2020 to evaluate all of this. So as the motion stands, I have to argue in favor of it.
Okay. I have 8 additional names on the list, and I'm going to ask that we cut the list. Now there's one more. We'll close the speaker list because we're speaking to the amendment only. And I think by the time those 9 people have spoken just briefly, whether they're for or against the amendment, all of us will have our minds made up whether or not we vote for or against the amendment, and then we'll go to the main motion. So Melissa Van Dyke, then Scott Vanderploeg, and then Steve Boetsma.
Melissa Van Dyke, Classis BC Northwest. If I'm understanding this correctly, I believe, Joel, what you are trying to help us see is that it is very difficult for Synod to mandate what a local congregation does. So Synod does not track all of the staff members that a church has. So when you put in a requirement, the question is, how are we holding people accountable to following through on this requirement? So how do we do that as Synod? How can we? Is it within the scope of our responsibility or the power that's given us this 1 week that we're gathered to follow through on what we are asking? So I believe that this is incredibly valuable and necessary in every congregation and classes and for all of us as individuals. But I'm hearing the concern is, where's the follow through? If we have trouble getting minutes from people for our historical committee, or if we can't even get safe church teams in each classes or congregation, where is the accountability and what can we actually do? And I think your motion is trying to say we can't mandate individual churches to adopt this because we can't hold them accountable. I should be talking to the chair, sorry. We can't hold them accountable to making sure that they actually do that, because we don't keep staff lists. So the administrative assistant at First Christian Reformed Church in Vancouver would need to sign this, but who's tracking that?
Scott Vanderploeg, then Steve Boetsma, then Joel Van den Werken.
Scott Vanderploeg, Classes Southeast, U.S. Mr. Chairman, I don't know whether I support this amendment or not yet. I'd like to understand better how it relates to the entire motion, and let me ask my question this way. Our church is maybe a unique test case because we have well over 50 employees. And so I'd like to understand whether the code of conduct, it's intended to be signed by all ordained ministry personnel or all church staff. And I'd like to understand whether it's the intention, whether we would have to include this in the review every year of all staff or just ordained staff.
That's a great question. I understand the confusion there, and we did talk about that at the committee level as well. And so that, again, is why we had recommended that this requires further study and review in order to tease out the particulars of how the code would be implemented. So that would be part of the implementation stage.
Steve, and then Joel, and then Adam.
Steve Boetsma, Classes Thornapple Valley. If the initial motion had said that we require all churches to sign a code of conduct, that would be different than saying all churches must sign the code of conduct that this committee comes up with. Because maybe my church already has a code of conduct, and now you're going to require me to change to a different one. Maybe mine is more in depth. So I'm in favor of this proposed recommendation or the amendment because we're recommending to churches and classes that if, in essence, if you don't have one yet, here is one you should be using. But the initial one requiring me to use what the committee comes up with, I think oversteps the bounds.
Okay. I see names are continuing to come onto the speaker queue, and I had ruled that we would cut off the speaker queue, that we would freeze it. So I'm going to do that at this point. Any names that have still come on, I'm going to allow. But as of this point, please close the speaker queue. Just Tardy Electronics just catching up with us? Or? Oh, okay. So the line was even bigger than I knew at the time because it ran right off of the bottom of the screen. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Can I speak to that? I think what the brother brings up is another angle to the process of implementation. I don't believe it was the idea of the committee to say, if you have a code of conduct, get rid of yours. We have a better one. It was, we're here to serve the churches to develop a code of conduct. If you don't have one, here's one that you can use. If you do have one, I think the committee would celebrate that.
Okay. Joel, and then Adam, and then Jose.
Joel Van den Werken, Classes Atlantic Northeast. Since Melissa and Steve gave most of my comments, what's that? I'll do this. Since Melissa and Steve gave most of my comments, I won't make those. To a couple of comments that were made earlier, Mr. Chairman, I think, yes, it does take this is saying we're no longer, at this point, we're not requiring this, we're simply recommending it. But I think part of that reason is for what the committee is saying, that we don't really have a sense for what we're recommending to the churches yet. So let's give ourselves enough wiggle room in the motion to say, let's come up with a really good plan before we just vote on it here at this point. So that's the intention of the motion, the amendment.
Adam.
Adam Isinga, Classes Iacota. This is more of a point of clarification. I'm not sure who can help on this. It seems that the committee who will be in charge, I'm looking at recommendation 1, which is the adoption of the terminology for diversity. And it seems that's the committee that's going to be tasked if this goes forward with coming up with a code of conduct. Is there any way of understanding how that's related to the terminology for diversity? Like, does that then become the code of conduct in these areas?
I'll speak to that recommendation 1, which was initial, now has become recommendation B.
Understood. So recommendation
To
B.
form a committee.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's, yeah, I believe that edit has already taken place. So.
Understood. Thank you for that clarification.
Jose, then Caleb.
Jose Reyes, Classes, Arizona. Mr. Chair, I've got one question here that's been bugging me since we started this whole thing about having people in ministry sign on to this. Somebody has to lead the trainings for people who speak language other than English. We've got Classes Koami and Hanmi, then you have a lot of Hispanic churches. How would you address that?
That's provided for in recommendation further on down the line. But yes, the committee did think of that and has addressed it.
Caleb, then Kathy.
Caleb Dixon, Classes, Red Mesa. I'd like to call the question.
The speaker queue has already been cut off, so that in effect has been ruled. Kathy?
Kathy Smith, faculty advisor. I was debating whether to speak now or on the main motion, but I think it's pertinent to the change from shall be signed by or recommended. And it's this, that following up on the comments about whether it applies only to ordained staff or to all staff, and the comment about how we don't have lists of those staff, it also recommends to include these things in the supplement to the church order, which of course is a great thing. But I think Synod should be aware that in the church order, we have regulations about office bearers, ministers, elders, deacons, commissioned pastors. We have no regulations for unordained staff. So to put something in the church order, the supplement, would be introducing something new in terms of a regulation for unordained staff. And I just wanted to make sure that Synod was aware of that.
Josh, and then John. Yeah, so Josh, you have another proposal for an amendment. We couldn't handle that now because we can't do 2 amendments at a time, so then you'd have to get in the speaker queue later. Yeah. John?
John Zeidoff, BC Southeast. I speak in favor of the I speak against this amendment. I've been employed in Christian school circles my whole life. We've had this kind of code of conduct in place in BC for probably 20 years. As far as the supervisory duty, I think that's a bit of a moot point. I think the bigger point is that the denomination is showing due diligence, that this is a requirement for all churches, and if they choose not to follow it, then the ball is in their park. At least the denomination has done their due diligence and can't be held liable for it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. That brings us to the end of our speaker list. In a moment, we're going to vote. Please be clear on this. You are voting for the amendment only. So you are voting whether to amend as to this proposal. After that, we'll go back to the main motion, whether in its original form or in its amended form. So you are voting on the amendment only. All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed to the amendment, same sign. Aye. Oh, okay, let's use the yes-no vote. Go to your yes/no vote and please vote yes or no whether you are in favor of the amendment or not. Yes, in favor. No, not in favor.
If I was a bishop.
Okay, we're close enough to having everyone voted. The motion is clearly defeated. So we are back to the motion as it was before the amendment was proposed. We had a speaker list. That speaker, pardon? If you want to propose an amendment, you have to do that the proper way. So then you have to submit. Okay, so we had a speaker list, and we'll add you onto that speaker list.
Got to flip the yes to no or the no to yes. Not accepting response.
Okay, well, we'll give the electronics a little time to catch up here, maybe because we had the yes/no vote, and we have to go back to that and whatnot. So let's all just kind of relax for a moment, realize where we are. Are you in?
Okay.
Okay, so you're on there, Aaron. And we have a list of 6 speakers. Please keep your comments brief and to the point. Don't repeat things that have already been said. Indicate whether you're for or speaking for or against the motion as it stands. Scott?
Scott Vanderploeg, Class of Southeast U.S. In light of our earlier discussion when I asked my questions, I wonder whether the advisory committee would be open to just real friendly word change. The code of conduct could be. That would allow, still, it's mandated, there's going to be a code of conduct, but it'll give them the opportunity to address some of the issues as an example that I raised. Is that friendly?
Yep.
We would agree. It is.
I don't think so.
The reporter and representative from the committee would suggest that this is essentially the same as the motion that we just voted down. I'm going to rule that that's the case. Next speaker, Gregory.
Gregory Ked, Classis, Northern Michigan. I'm not sure which way I'm going to vote yet, in favor or against the motion. Just wondering, Mr. Chairman, if the committee considered a healthy use of power and all the implications it would be for training and signing, if there's a code of conduct that would be good for all of us to use as well, besides obviously scripture of loving God and loving others. So just wondering if maybe the advisory committee could talk about what a healthy use of power would look like as well.
We did, and that's also a part of one of the recommendations in terms of the training.
Okay. James, and then Carl, and then Josh.
James Deemer, Class of Zealand. Mr. Chair, I guess I'm looking for clarification as to what ministry personnel entails. Does that go down all the way to cadets and gyms leaders, young people's leaders, or just specifically office bearers?
Please make your ways to the microphone as soon as the previous person has already spoken.
So the next speakers are Carl and then Josh. Go ahead, Patricia.
Ministerial staff includes all those who are employed by the church. But again, this is going to a committee that is going to review this further in depth.
Carl Galenzi. You're on the list. You don't have to speak. Thanks. See how easy it is to make friends? Just put your name on the list and then take it off, and you make lots of friends. Josh?
Joshua Van Drunen, Classis Georgetown. I had sent in an amendment, and the amendment is primarily to link the signing of the Code of Conduct with the signing of the Covenant of Office Bearers.
Okay, Josh, could you clarify where that fits in as an amendment? You're adding this phrase, leaving the original recommendation as is and simply adding the phrase, this code of conduct is to be signed alongside the covenant of office bearers?
Correct.
Okay. So he's proposing an amendment to add this code of conduct is to be signed alongside the covenant of office bearers. Is that supported? Discussion to the amendment. Give a moment here, if you want to talk to the amendment.
I'm sure my electronic me will catch up to me. Mike Vanderline, Classis BC Southeast. I speak against the proposed amendment. The Code of Conduct, as it is stated in the proposal, is for ministry personnel. That is linking it to persons who receive a paycheck from a CRC entity. In other words, anyone who is paid and as a consequence has a representative function of the church, whether it be locally or broader. It does not link it necessarily to office bearers. And so this amendment is turning it in a different direction here that's not meant by the main the main motion. They have stated that this is something we're going to look at, and it may be, the Code of Conduct may be in the future suggested for office bearers and stuff, but that's not what the main motion is dealing with right now. What it's referring to right now is ministry personnel, paid staff, whether that be the minister, whether that be the secretary, and so on.
Next speaker is Chelsea, then Jonathan, then Andrew.
Chelsea Harmon, Classis BC Northwest. I speak against this recommendation of amendment because I think this and all of the other amendments we have been trying to do are doing the work of what this committee will be doing when they review and decide these things.
Thank you.
So coming into this from a university setting into the pastorate, like this is so normative as part of the process. But as far as I understand things, the covenant of office bearers, you only sign that once, correct? No? All right. Well, just thinking back to the proposal that's in front of us, a code of conduct is something that is renewed. This is an ongoing process throughout one's career and the life of the church. And so you don't re-sign the covenant of office bearers every year. And so these two things are such different animals, I think that the language would need to be kept separate. So I would speak against this.
Okay.
Andy Hansen, Classis California South. I also speak against this on the grounds that seems to me the covenant for office bearers is something that has been tried by hundreds of years of church history, holds a special place within our denomination. I think that when we're talking about this, we're talking about something that we haven't even seen yet, putting it on the same level as the three forms of unity. I think this is very important. This issue is very important, but I just don't think this is the correct approach. Thank you.
Okay. Someone calls for the question. All in favor of ceasing debate, please say aye. Aye. Opposed to that, same sign. That's carried. So we have speakers yet on the list, and we will allow them, and then we will vote on the amendment only. Chelsea is on the list, or she spoke already. You're not on there twice. Jonathan? Andrew, you spoke. So I think that we were at the end of the list. We will vote on the amendment only. The amendment as you have it before you, to add this phrase or this sentence. All in favor, please say aye. Opposed, the same sign. Aye. Wow, that's a first. Okay, as we're here, just a point of order, we had voted on a previous amendment, and seeing that that previous amendment failed, there was a member who wished to register a negative vote. But because it failed, it's not recorded in the minutes. So you can't register a negative vote for something that's not recorded in the minutes. But essentially, that brought us back to the original motion. And theoretically, if that original motion will pass, and that same delegate is not happy with that, a negative vote could be recorded at that time. Clear? Just wanted to make that clear so that nobody feels that they haven't been heard. Okay, we are back to the original motion. We are back to our speaker queue of 8 that I can see on the list, and it may go on and on. Yeah, it does go actually off the screen too a little bit. So we have quite a list of speakers here, and I'm going to rule that we close that list of speakers because we've been discussing this particular thing for a long time, and I have a hunch that by the time that we've finished this list of speakers, there'll be a number of people that want to cease debate. Okay, so we've got Aaron DeBoer.
Aaron DeBoer, Pacific Northwest. I brought an amendment. And this is why. I think we're over our skis, and I hate that we have to remind through the chair of this body that all we need is contained in the scriptures for life and godliness. We read that in 2 Peter and in Belgic Confession, Article 7. I believe we need to strike 3C for this reason. If the committee believes that they can provide us a list of sins that their code of conduct is going to be more effective at restraining than the power of the Word of God and the Holy Spirit, then God help us. In 2 Peter, we read that we are partakers of the divine nature.
Aaron, I'm going to have to just rule this out of order. And let me explain to you a moment. You've asked to strike it. That's not an amendment. There's no language that is a clearer nullification of a motion than strike it. So really what you're asking to do is you're asking the body to vote it down. Striking it is not an amendment, okay? So that presentation was just simply you're asking the body to vote it down. Next speaker, Melissa.
Melissa Van Dyke, Classis BC Northwest. I'm also proposing an amendment to the recommendation. And from what I've heard about the conversation, a lot of this is about how is this implemented well. And so I'm recommending that we revise the motion to eliminate that last section. And I'll read what I'm proposing. That Synod mandate the committee appointed by action in recommendation B, which I think was an edit we agreed to as a body, to draft a code of conduct for all employed ministry staff within the CRCNA. The draft code of conduct will be presented to Synod Synod 2020 for approval and with recommendations for implementation for the denomination, classes, and churches. So moved.
Quiet.
So I'm wondering if that's a...
I already closed.
Oh,
the
again! Oh.
I closed the speaker queue, so we cannot entertain another motion to propose an amendment. I'm sorry we can't do that because it might have made it into the Guinness Book of World Records for the most amendments. Yeah, point of order?
You closed it and you knew. William,
Oh, yeah. Pardon? What would you like to challenge the chair on? Not anymore, you can't. You could have at the time, but you can't anymore now. Excuse me? You can amend after it. So if you're not happy with the motion, then you can vote it down and you can submit another motion at that time. I mean, we're not trying to put up roadblocks or barriers, but we're trying to do this decently and in good order.
Could
Another
I
point
make, could I have a point of order?
Yeah.
So Kathy Smith, faculty advisor, I'm just trying to understand what happened. I understand you declared the list to be closed. We didn't vote to cease debate, right?
De facto, isn't it the same, Kathy? If
I think
if the chair rules that the speaker queue is closed, isn't that the same as if someone calls for the question and we vote on it? And
well, the rules are that the chair, yes, can propose secession of debate, and then if that is approved, discussion ceases and the vote is taken and no other speakers. Alternatively, if a delegate proposes to cease debate and that's approved, then debate will cease after the list is gone. I would interpret what you did to be on the order of the chair giving a time length to the debate, because we didn't really vote to cease debate, and you said we were going to close the speaker list, so then the time length for the debate was until those speakers are finished. But I don't think we voted to cease debate yet, so my interpretation would be that an amendment would not be out of order because we have not done that yet.
if you give me permission to do that and think that's within the church order, I'm happy to accommodate. Pardon? Yeah, that's true, no clapping. Only for the president, right? Go ahead, Melissa. Okay, so Melissa,
I don't know
Go
if
ahead.
that's a friendly change or not.
Excuse me, we were.
yeah. So they're asking, would you concur with this and would you receive this as a replacement rather than putting it to the body for vote?
Just let us talk that through. Yeah.
is sitting there.
Yeah.
We would like to talk with other committee members who are also present here.
Why doesn't everybody stand up? Don't leave the room unless you urgently have to, but stand up, have a little bit of a stretch.
So the sticky wicket got sticky. You know, Kathy kind of knew.
The dilemma with this is if this is adopted, if we propose, we go back to discussing the amendment, or do we go back?
Well, if they say it's friendly, then the speaker queue can continue.
If they say it's friendly, then the speaker queue continues, but it's already closed.
Okay, now, point of order as well, that, I mean, the advisory committee is presenting the report, but that they keep relying on Patricia is wrong. It's a report that was received from the COD, so they should be consulting all three. Okay, good.
That's why they wanted to bring it.
Okay. The other thing is that, you know, however this common practice is incorrect, if it appears to the chair that an amendment is proper to the chair, okay? I mean, bottom line, if it takes this much to know if it's friendly, it just isn't friendly, right?
Which means you have to vote on the amendment. And the speaker queue remains
But this is your copy, right?
It's interesting, the closing of the list versus the ceasing for debate. Because I wonder if you had said,
Basically, I said I'm closing the list because we're going to cease debate, but I may not have used those words.
no, and I'm trying to think of if you had, if I would have been like, there's a motion in there. Because if it was coming from the floor, then I don't have any control. Like last night when Brian did it right before me. But I don't know if I would have been like, I'm the next. I don't know if I could have spoken because when you said I'm shutting the list, I didn't hear I'm ceasing, that my motion was no longer going to be able to be considered.
In fact, the president can say we're going to cease debate immediately and not even.
But then I could have challenged the chair.
Oh, sure. Whatever.
So the question, I'll wait till everybody's. So the question was asked if this is friendly to a friendly amendment, and we would say yes, it is. We understand that there are details of implementation, and this would be a way to address that question. So yes.
Okay, so here's where we're at. A proposed amendment has been made. The committee is willing to adopt that. If you go to Robert's Rules of Order, technically you need to ask the body, and if anybody is not in favor of it, then you would put it to a vote. Our rules are not quite as specific as the Robert's Rules of Order. But I think, having had all the discussion that we did and that kind of thing, I want to put the power back into your hands. And so I'm going to allow you to have a yes-no vote on whether or not you want to accept this amendment. right? You've had time to look at it while they were caucusing. I'm going to ask you to go to your yes, no vote. Yes, right? Amendment. You're right. No, yeah, Peter?
To me, this seems like I think the body would agree with it, that's my sense, but then the speaker queue is only however many is left. I feel like that would really restrict the conversation, because there might be some other feelings.
Well, so if everybody considers it, or the majority of it consider it to be a friendly amendment, then the speaker queue just stays as it is, right? Then you can still address it, because it's essentially then considered to be the same motion. Chelsea.
Classes BC Northwest. This version does not have the line that then has the 4 points. So the code of conduct shall be, and that's purposeful to take out all of that information.
That's a point of clarification?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
My assumption is that that would be part of the implementations that are included for Synod 2020 to consider.
We consider that the same, that would be part of the implementation process that the committee would be working on.
Okay. So thank you for those points of clarification. The friendliness of this amendment was thought to be that then implicit in that would be the points that are under bullets under Code of Conduct. Please vote yes or no to receiving this as a friendly amendment. Okay, that has overwhelmingly been adopted. Back to the original speaker queue, speaking to this motion now. The amendment has been adopted. There are 4 names on here. You may choose whether to speak to it, or if your concerns have been alleviated by this new wording, then you may also take your name off the list. The speakers are Joel, Chelsea, Harrison, and Mike. Okay. Chelsea? Okay. Harrison? Chelsea, your classes team probably put you on while you were standing at the mic speaking. Harrison?
Harrison Newhouse, Classis Lake Superior, speaking in support of the motion. I sympathize with an earlier statement about that the Word of God, the movement of the Spirit, and the laws of God ought to be enough. But we know from experience and the realities of today, and I speak as a pastor, I like to have the body of Christ to help give me guidance in particulars, because I remember listening to yesterday the conversation held by the 2 dear people, and I remember thinking to myself, this is helpful. Even as one who's been in the ministry for well over 20 years, I like to have sometimes or some kind of a reminder from time to time that I need to put boundaries within how I interact with people. And I am encouraged, particularly when you have so many stories out there of spiritual abuse, sometimes by well-meaning people who could have used some rebuke, could have used some guidelines. Thank you.
Mike? Mike Vanderlaan? Deleted. It's an old excuse. Okay. Huh? All right, we're ready to vote. You have the recommendation before you. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, the same sign. That's carried.
We go to letter D, prevention of abuse in CRCNA offices. The Synod mandate the Council of Delegates to review the adequacy of the training provided to CRCNA staff, the adequacy of the provisions for support to a complaint, and mechanisms to avoid potential conflicts of interest in the process for dealing with complaints. A review should be informed by careful listening to persons who found the processes helpful and persons who did not.
Recommendation D is before you. Discussion? All in favor, please. Absolutely. That's why I asked if there's discussion.
I apologize for my tardiness. Jake Porter.
Name
sorry,
and classes.
Sorry, I forgot how important I am. Jake Porter from Classes Holland. I just point of clarification. Is this going to address appeals? Like the Council of Delegates is going to be looking at prevention of abuse, including the things that we discussed the other night regarding the appellate process. Is that part of this dynamic, or is that not? Okay, this is different. Okay, thank you very much.
Recommendation D. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. That's carried.
E, training at classes and local levels. Number one, that Synod encourage all classes to develop a strategy to train office bearers and key church leaders to be alert to power dynamics within the communities they serve and to be equipped to prevent abuse of power. The goal of the strategy is to ensure that all office bearers receive initial training and refreshment through ongoing educational initiatives. An effective strategy will include the following: appropriate training resources, reasonable time allocation for training, and acknowledgement and monitoring of completion of training. Do you want to take these one at a time? That's kind of how we were understanding that.
Let's do that just to keep it clean. Recommendation E1. Discussion? All in favor, please. Just go to a mic then. Stanley?
Stanley Grodoff, Class Psi Coda. I just want to make sure I'm actually addressing number one, and I think I am, because I just thought we were going to take them all at the same time. I am speaking in favor of the motion for this recommendation, and I'm pretty sure it's number one. In particular, I request that the training for office bearers include clarification on and identification of power dynamics within the communities we serve. Following Patricia Van Rienen's interview with Carl Galenzi yesterday, I was part of a conversation where confusion was expressed over the example, and forgive me if we misheard or misrepresented it, of asking an administrative assistant to do clerical work as an instance of treating an employee as a servant. So we're left asking the question, like, how do we navigate the area of expectations in the church office, council room, workplace, school classroom, where there are different viewpoints on what sorts of expectations are reasonable and what sorts are not? And what is the appropriate response to unintentional insensitivity in these sorts of scenarios that is taken as an abuse of power? Further, I would appreciate being trained to recognize specific markers where informal admonishment or formal discipline of a church member straying from biblical truth or living in Christ-like love crosses the line from appropriate procedures on the part of church leadership where it crosses the line to an abuse of power. How do we judge the legitimacy of an allegation made by the recipient of this admonishment or discipline if they make an allegation that this admonishment or discipline was actually an abuse of power? How can we judge the legitimacy of a complaint such as that? I think what I'm getting at is the perceived subjective nature of the abuse of power. So the more clearly we can define and identify it and be trained in this, the better church leaders will be able to avoid it from happening and address it when it does. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Jose Reyes and then Andy DeCourt.
Jose Reyes, Classes, Arizona. I'm still wondering about this. It says Synod to encourage all classes to develop a strategy to train office bearers and key church leaders. The responsibility, Mr. Chairman, goes to the classes. And if we're going to be translating something in a particular language that so nobody else is using at the time, does that mean that another classes that begins ministering to a different language group that another one already has, do they have to develop again another one? Or that's why my question was originally, who will lead these trainings and who will develop the materials to be distributed with the different ethnic groups?
We believe letter I addresses that. Abuse prevention resources for culturally diverse churches. So if that still is not answered at that point, please raise that. Mr. Chair, could our committee members speak to the last speaker?
Yeah. Okay. It's the privilege of the floor.
Thank you. Stanley, I think you had a question. I just wanted to clarify that. And I'm glad that you raised it because there are times when there is confusion or perhaps I didn't say it very clearly. But you raised the point about an administrative staff and the example that I had given regarding lording it over or being a servant. If it wasn't clear in what I had said, she was asked or he was asked to do something that was clearly outside of the job description. So again, when we're looking at training, it's really important that we have clarity, and that is one of the things that training provides. It provides that kind of clarity and guidance, and I think that's what you are getting at. Thank you.
Andy?
Andy DeCourt, Classes, Arizona. I appreciate the desire of the motion. I speak against it. It seems premature in light of what's going to be coming in the future. And also, classes aren't well equipped to do this. We need to work on our discipleship training skills before we do this. We heard, in my committee, we heard from Cees van Nieuwenhuis, who's talked about how Pastor Church Resources is working on things for elders and deacons. Maybe this could be folded into that. So I speak against this motion.
Any other speakers? Motion E1 is before us. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. It's carried.
Number 2, that Synod encourage all classes to monitor implementation of the training strategy, and to consider adopting policies to include completion of training and safe church policies in the regular review of credentials or as a requirement for being seated at a classis meeting.
Discussion on E2. All in favor, please say aye. Opposed, the same. It's carried.
Number 3, that Synod mandate the Executive Director develop in cooperation with Safe Church Ministry, Pastor Church Resources, Calvin College, and others, a resource toolkit for training office bearers and leaders readily accessible through the CRC website and Faith Alive Christian Resources.
Discussion on E3. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. It's carried.
F, strengthening safe church ministry. Number 1, that Synod mandate the executive director to oversee the development of appropriate measures for responding effectively to emotional abuse. Such measures will include definition, inclusion in relevant CRC policies, and appropriate responses through restorative practices and the Safe Church Advisory Panel process.
Discussion on F1. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. It's carried.
Number 2, that Synod mandate the executive director to oversee a review of the adequacy of safe church policies for follow-up and reported cases that involve church leaders. Findings and actions taken by the executive director should be reported to the Council of Delegates to ensure that the CRCNA is exercising due diligence to prevent repeat occurrences or transfer of abusive leaders to other churches. The review shall consider best practices in church abuse ministry.
Discussion on F2. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, the same. That's carried.
Number 3, that Synod mandate the Council of Delegates to examine in detail the potential for conflicts of interest in current safe church procedures and to evaluate the need for and benefits of using outside experts to deal with situations that have a high potential for conflicts of interest. So moved.
On F3, any discussion? All in favor? Okay.
Jake Porter, Howland Classes. I'm just wondering who gets the power to define what a conflict of interest is? Who are the parties that make that clear?
I believe the Council of Delegates.
So, Mr. Chairman, my only hesitation with this, and I don't know that it's strong enough to speak against it, but the church, not our church particularly, but the church has a history of not seeing a conflict of interest when it might have should. So I'm wondering if we might, I don't even know what to do next, like recommend something to have the report, I don't know, define who gets to make that decision.
I don't know if this is a satisfactory answer, but further on down, we do talk about an ombudsman to serve in that kind of a role.
Steve is going to speak.
Oh. I would, Paul DeVries, Council of Delegate Chair. I just remind the body that the Council of Delegates reports to this body. So, yes, it would be the Council of Delegates' job to delineate that, but we report to this body. So it would be up to Synod to either say yes or no or do more work or whatever Synod would want to. Remember, everything the COD does comes back to you.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, ready to vote? On the motion, all in favor? Okay, there we go. You slipped in. Marie?
Marie Van Orney, Class of Central Plains. I am in favor of this motion. However, I also agree with the previous speaker that maybe the language isn't strong enough. Yes, I heard the comment about further discussion later on, but I want to raise that I think it shouldn't be up to a decision later on. It should be whenever there is any potential dispute, it should be automatically be available right from the beginning. So maybe some table, maybe rewording. I had something ready, but it wouldn't quite work right now. So, thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Marie. Lori Fieber.
Lori Fieber, classes BC Northwest. What I'm hoping, it's probably not a friendly amendment because it's too different, but how about when either party deems it necessary that a third party be included when either party in the issue deems it necessary?
So are you proposing an amendment? Yeah, but not that way. It has to be written. It has, pardon? She's a member of the advisory.
Yeah.
Paul?
Paul DeVries, Council of Delegates Chair. Perhaps I can help. As I understand the motion, you're asking the Council of Delegates to examine this and to develop some policy. That's what we do. You're not asking the Council of Delegates in each and every instance to make a judgment as to whether there's a conflict of interest, right? You're asking us to examine what our current practice is and to create some policies to help keep there from being future conflict of interest. That's my understanding of it. Not we're going to adjudicate each and every case as to where there is.
That's our understanding as well.
Okay, here's where we're at. We ought to be adjourning. We have a lunch that's waiting for us, a special banquet. There will be instructions for that. We need to transport over to there. I hate to drop something right in the middle of a motion, so I want to finish this off, but only if we can do that expediently. And okay, there's one name on the list, and if that person draws his name off the list because we've heard enough, then the calling for the question would become a moot point. Okay, the question is called for. All in favor of ceasing debate, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, the same. That is carried. We have one speaker. Please be brief.
That means I cannot do my amendment. I sent in an amendment. That means I cannot do it, correct?
Yeah. No.
Okay.
Right. All you can do is, if you're not happy with this motion, you can ask everybody to vote it down, and you'll see whether or not they do that.
I'll just make one comment. I am in favor. Mike Maryland, BC Southeast. What I was going to propose is the removal of the word safe, because there are church procedures that are outside of safe church that matter to this sort of thing. And I'm not sure I saw it anywhere else, if that makes sense. And the example would be the appeals process. That's not a safe church procedure, per se, but we need to look at conflicts of interest within the appeals process, too. So I'm just going to make that comment.
Okay.
Okay, we have a motion before us. Recommendation F3. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. It is carried. We're going to break here, and we will resume this after lunch. A couple of announcements first, and please listen carefully. We are going to have a couple of announcements. We'll have prayer. When you need to shuffle, do that afterwards, not before. Transportation to the Prince Conference Center will be on the south side of the Fine Arts Center. Everybody point south. All right, we all know where south is. That's where transportation is for those who need it. Committee 9 will meet during the afternoon break in your original room 125. Committee 9 to 125 during the afternoon break. Closing prayer.
Let's bow our heads in prayer. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, during the course of this week, we have dealt with some extremes. We've looked at big picture items, and in the process, we've dotted our I's and crossed our T's. We have come from very rural regions and from very urban. We have experienced and talked about pain, and this morning we've had a great time of praise and celebration as we looked at our new candidates. We've had times of clarity and confusion. We've worked early and late. We've worked carefully and in good order, and through all of this, Lord, you've been with us. We ask for your continuing blessing on our work, and now we give you thanks for the coming food and ask for its blessing on us. In Jesus' name, amen.
So this recommendation talks